Chapter 24. Dougal spun around to see who was screaming at them. A ghostly figure stood across the street, pointing and yelling at Ember. She wore ebonhawk armor and bore a great sword in both hands. For a moment, Dougal thought it was Vala herself, returned from the dead, and for a moment he was transfixed by the idea. But the mist around her face cleared to reveal a stranger, one of the Watchers. That was when Dougal realized someone else was yelling at him. "Dougal Keen!" Ember shouted. She grabbed his shoulder and pulled him around to look at her. "What?" he asked, still stunned by everything roiling in his head. "That!" Ember stabbed a finger in the direction of another street that emptied out into the square. Dougal remembered from his research that this road led to the soldiers' barracks, although he was sure it had been centuries since anyone had slept there. A column of ghostly soldiers stormed down that road, rushing into the main square. Dougal recognized them at once as part of the same force that had killed his friends the last time he'd braved the streets of Ascalon City. These were the spirits of people slaughtered by the foe fire, like the simple shepherds they'd met near the dragon brand, only far more dangerous. He gazed into their faces and saw no love there, no compassion for the living, just madness and an all-consuming lust for death. "Bear's blood," Gulick said as he unlimbered his axe. "This will be a battle worthy of any saga." "You're a fool," said Ember. "You can't beat them all. I will not die without a fight." "Try not dying at all," Crank said as he smacked the Norn on the back of the head. "Run! This way." Ember sprinted away from the column of ghosts. She moved with the lumbering grace of a lion, weaving her way between and over bodies scattered around the ground. "Dougal!" Riona reached for Dougal's shoulders. "We need to go." She snatched Dougal's hand and pulled them along, following the char. Dougal stumbled along after her the best he could, although his feet felt as if they were bound with stones. "We can't outrun them," said Riona. "Head back for the gates. Too many between there and us," said Dougal. To the others he shouted, "Follow me. We're going to the palace." Riona shot Dougal a hard look and said, "The ghosts think as they did in life. They try not to leave the city itself, so they should not violate the king's chamber without approval." He grabbed her arm and hauled her along with him for a few steps, until she was back up to speed. She punched him in the back as she finally matched his pace. "You idiot," she said. "Why did you wait? What did you see?" Dougal bit his tongue. This wasn't the time for the kind of discussion such words demanded. Instead, he just ran. They wound their way through the streets of the city, racing towards the royal chambers. Because Dougal knew the way, Ember and Gulick, still carrying Cranks, slowed down for Riona and him to catch up. Now in the lead, Dougal sprinted straight for their goal and hoped that it was still standing. Ahead of them rose a pillar of light. The energies of the foe fire itself coalesced into a single blade raised against the sky. When Adalbern summoned the foe fire on the battlements, he opened a sinkhole down through the catacombs that laced the foundations of the city. From that sinkhole rose a tower of radiance, the lasting memory of his great spell. They turned right before they reached the luminous pillar, snaking through narrow alleyways, half filled with rubble, leaving the ghosts behind. At last they reached the open court before the palace itself. Dougal's heart quailed for a moment, for the lower reaches of the palace were blocked, their entrances crushed, the upper floors pancaked onto the lower ones. A single long staircase reached up along an inner wall. Dougal checked his mental map and saw that it would lead to the royal chambers themselves. Unfortunately, the staircase was guarded. A squad of ghostly soldiers stood there waiting for them. When they saw Ember, the guards at the gate drew their swords and charged at her. "Death to the invaders," they shouted. "Death, death. Is there any other way out of here?" Ember said as she drew her sword. "No." Dougal glanced back to see the soldiers they'd run from in the main square gaining on them fast. "We need to go through the guards. The royal chambers are at the top of the stairs." Dougal unsheathed his sword then, and the ebon blade seemed to hum in his hand. "There are fewer of them ahead of us than behind," said Riona, her own blade drawn. "Forward we go then," Dougal growled, turning back towards the steps and immediately running into Gulick's massive form. The Norn grabbed Dougal to prevent him from tumbling backwards. "Hold him." Gulick pressed Cranks into Dougal's arms. "Bear's nose. He's a good friend, but a lousy passenger. I will hold back the ghosts for you." "But what?" Before Dougal could finish his thought, much less his sentence, the Norn leapt past him, swinging his axe over his head. "All right," he bellowed at the oncoming horde of ghosts. "Who wants me to send them to their eternal rest first?" Riona grabbed Dougal and pulled him past Gulick as the Norn pressed forward towards the bunched rank of spirits. Above them, Ember had already begun a doomed battle with the ghosts guarding the gate. Her flashing blade and claws bit into their inferior forms, cutting them like smoke. While this did not seem to cause the ghosts any obvious pain, after enough such blows, they began to dissipate like fog, and hope leapt in Dougal's heart. Crank shoved hard against Dougal's grip. "Put me down, right now." "You don't stand a chance against the ghosts," said Dougal, "and quit squirming." "Of course I don't stand a chance, you idiot, but you do. Put me down." Dougal set the Azure down on the stair behind him. "Now get in there and use that sword of yours." themselves. Before Dougal could reply, one of the ghosts that Ember had dispatched reformed from the swirling mist surrounding her. It spotted Dougal and charged straight at him, screaming, "Death to the invaders! Death! Death!" Working on reflexes, Dougal brought up his sword and stabbed it straight through the ghost. The creature stopped cold, clutched at the blade for an instant, and then started to scream in pain. It dropped to the stairs and lay there for an instant before entirely fading away. Despite himself, Dougal smiled. "Step aside, Ember," he shouted. "I'm coming through." The char twisted out of his way, moving with the powerful grace of a hunting cat. Dougal stepped up and slashed his weapon through the forms of 3 ghosts at once. Every one of them howled in protest and cringed at the weapon's touch. But after it passed through them, they stood straight back up and threw themselves into the fight again. Dougal cursed, "I'm hurting them all right, but only while the blade is actually in them." "That might be good enough," Ember said. She shivered, nearly frozen from all the ghostly swords that had swung through her. "Riona," Dougal said. One of the ghost's swords sliced right through his sword and then through him. It felt like it was trying to freeze his organs. He groaned in pain, then said, "Grab Ember, make for the top of the stairs." "No," she said. "We can't lose you." "I'll be right behind you," he said, slashing at the ghosts again, forcing them to keep their distance. "Promise." Snarling in protest, but doing what she had been asked, Riona took Ember by her arm, and the two of them raced around the massive ghosts to the left as Dougal forced them to the right. Once Ember and Riona were past him, Dougal kept pressing in that direction, circling around until the ghosts no longer stood between him and the stairs up to the royal chambers. Dougal was just about to break off the fight and race after the others when he realized that Cranks hadn't gone with Riona and Ember. He looked down at the stairs and saw Cranks standing where he had left him, still rummaging through his pack, hunting for one sort of gadget or another. "Get moving," Dougal called to the Azura. "I can't do this much longer." "I have something in here to help him," said Cranks. "Who?" But Dougal knew the answer as soon as the question left his lips. Still defending himself with his sword against increasingly wary ghosts, he gazed down past the creatures he was barely keeping at bay and spotted Gulick again, still taking on scores of the ghosts themselves. "By Bear's bloody claws," the Norn bellowed as he swung his axe all about. "I will battle you until my dying breath, whether sagas are sung of this day or not. No matter how fast you might finally kill me, you shall know you've been in the fight of your deaths." "Gulick," shouted Dougal, "break off and follow us." "And let them chase you down," shouted Gulick, grinning from ear to ear. "Never. The aquatic thunderator won't work," Frank said to himself. "I do have a darkness grenade, but I don't know if it's functional." He shook his head. "Just get moving, get up here," said Dougal. The Norn turned to Dougal and pointed up the stairs with his axe. "Remember me," he said, and turned back to slashing apart the spirits. They streamed out in strands of fog beneath his blows, only to reform moments later. Pressed on all sides now, Gulick bristled and began to transform into his ursine form. "I have one last healing draught, but that's not—" "Aha! Wait!" Cranks reached into his pack and yanked something out of one of the endless numbers of pockets in it. "Yes!" he shouted, and flung a small orb into the center of the fray. Gulick grinned and turned to shout something. It might have been thanks. Then the ball exploded into a ball of flame, the force of the blow driving both man and Azura back against the stairs. When the conflagration cleared, there was a sign of neither Norn or the ghosts, but only a shallow, scorched crater. Already the pale blue strands were reforming into ghosts. Crank stared at the devastation. "By the eternal alchemy! I used too much arcanic energy! I killed him! I thought it would help, and I killed Gulick!" The pair of ghosts nearest them, at the borders of the blast, reformed the quickest. Dougal stabbed each of the ghosts right through the chest. After they retreated out of the reach of his blade, Dougal reached down and grabbed the panicked Azura by the back of his collar. Then he turned and sprinted straight up the steps, dragging Cranks along with him. The staircase ascended forever, and Dougal could see Riona and Ember ahead, climbing the steep steps as fast as they could. Beneath him, he could hear the entire city howl. Looking down, he could see ghosts spilling from every doorway and trying to force themselves up the stairs behind them. Dougal, bringing the still frantic Cranks along with him, drove through a wide open doors at the top of the stairs, bursting into what his ancient map said were the royal chambers. They landed in a tangled ball in the center of the main chamber, and before Dougal could pull himself free, Ember and Riona grabbed them both and dragged them behind a tattered dressing screen that cut off the back half of the room from the front. Dougal started to ask what was going on, but Ember clapped a hand over his mouth while Riona muzzled Crank. Dougal's eyes darted around and spotted a ghost standing right over them. He cursed himself for believing that the city's soldiers would not follow them in here. Yet a ghost stood there staring at him him with a kind and gentle face. The unexpected face stopped Dougal cold. The look in the ghost's eyes was not maddened or vicious. This ghost looked sad. Rather than armor, the ghost wore the rich and elegant clothes of a royal courtier. He was balding, pot-bellied, and his eyes bore the weight of having seen far too many things for too damned long. He carried no weapon other than the handle of a ghostly knife still jutting from the wound in his chest. Riona raised her blade, but Dougal held up a hand to stop her. Mortals and ghosts viewed each other, and Dougal found his voice. Savion, he said. You're the king's servant, Savion. The ghost in ornate dress frowned and sniffed. Chief courtier, thank you, said the ghost, but I am Savion, and it is about time you got here, or someone like you. From the doorway near the head of the stairs, there arose a racket of the approaching mob. The ghost of Savion turned and walked back through the dressing screen, disturbing it less than a gentle breeze. Dougal could no longer see him, but the courtier's voice carried through the room. How dare you burst into the king's private quarters unannounced, Savion said, his voice commanding and firm. The ghost soldiers chanted at him. There are invaders. We must protect Ascalon. We must protect the king. Savion scoffed at them. I have been in these chambers this entire day, and there have been no brigand, no raiders, no bandit. Off with you. The ghost voices became more subdued and confused. We saw invaders, said one, but they were unsure of themselves now. Savion did not raise his voice, but his words dripped with menace. Leave now, or I shall summon his majesty, our great King Adalbern, to deal with your intrusion personally. Do not tally, but hunt your invaders elsewhere. The ghosts were cowed by the invoking of the king's name. Then, encouraged by the idea that the invaders were still at large somewhere else, the soldiers' chanting faded as they left the chambers and went off to search of prey somewhere outside of the king's private room. The ghost poked his head through the screen. I believe it is safe to speak now, he said as he emerged wholly before the others. Their dedication to the king is nearly as mindless as their bloodlust, and I can fuse them easily. Dougal got to his feet and stared at the ghost, stunned to see that something of the man had survived for so long. See, Ember said, elbowing Dougal in the shoulder. Fireburn was right. Savion. The courier didn't smile. He frowned less, but it had the same effect. To Dougal, he said, yes, I am Savion in the, well, not flesh exactly, but I'm afraid you have met me at a disadvantage, sir. Dougal blinked. Keen. Dougal Keen. Keen. Ghost's eyes lit up. No relation to Lieutenant Dorian Keen? Dougal's breath caught in his chest. Ancestor. The ghost nodded thoughtfully. Yes, I think I see some resemblance. A good man. We could have used him here, but other duties called. How is this possible? Asked Riona. I thought all of the ghosts in Ascalon City had been driven mad by the foe fire. Remember the story I told you? Said Ember. This is the Savion I spoke of. He was dead before Adalbern had used Magdare to ignite the foe fire. I assume this man certainly had unfinished business to attend to. This reunion is all very touching, Craig said, his voice rising into a furious stage whisper. But we have bigger problems right now. As long as they do not hear you or see you, the soldiers will not enter here, said Savion. They fear the king's wrath more than anything. Is he here? Dougal's head snapped around as he looked for any sign of Adalbern. Oh dear no, said Savion. He patrols the battlements of the north wall night and day, waiting for any sign of another Char assault. At this, the ghost gave Ember a sidelong glance. The wailing of the ghosts outside grew louder as these thoughts spun through Dougal's head. Those ghosts seem like they're still hungry for blood, he said. Savion grimaced with regret. I've rarely seen them this agitated. No outsiders have gotten this close to the royal chambers since the foe fire. It is possible that they will eventually choose to ignore my orders and charge the tower on their own initiative if they realized you are here. Riona frowned. I wonder if they would be so quick to follow your command if they knew you betrayed your king. If the Char's story is true, you fought against them with the Char at the very gates. Untrue and unkind. Savion looked down his nose at Riona, offended. I was doing my best to save the soldiers. His Majesty was determined to murder. Adalbern was desperate to keep the Char from taking Ascalon City, and he was prepared to do anything to stop it. He was furious at our soldiers for failing to stop the Char advance and thought them cowards. But they weren't cowards, said Dougal. Hardly. They were the bravest men and women I ever knew. But we were arrayed against an implacable foe with seemingly endless resources and arms. Savion scowled at Riona. The searing drove us from Rin, and the shame of that imbalanced his majesty. He began to argue with Prince Rurik, his only child, who advocated making peace with Adalbern's old enemies in Kryda and taking shelter within its borders. Then Rurik broke with the king and perished while leading a faction of Ascalonians into Kryda. The ghost sighed at the ancient loss. His majesty was devastated by his son's death, but he became more determined than ever to stand up against the Char and prove his son wrong, that he could save the kingdom single-handedly if need be. When it became clear that Ascalon city would fall and that he would not stop it. I think he went mad. I don't know. His voice, ragged and worn, looks to me like he got exactly what he wanted. The others, including the ghost, gaped at him. Dougal looked at Crank and could have sworn the Azura had been crying. Still, he wasn't Azura, and his logic outran his feeling. What? Haven't any of you ever studied game theory? If you can't win, you do the next best thing. You make sure your enemy can't win either. It works more often than you think because it changes the parameters of the game without your opponent's permission, often even without their knowledge. You're not playing to win any longer. You just want to keep them from winning, and that's a lot harder to stop. The ghostly courier blinked. What sort of creature are you? He said. I am Azura, said Cranks. I am after your time. Indeed, but you impute a great deal of rationalism to a man who had clearly gone mad. Savion's chilly glare froze Cranks solid on the spot. I was there with him. I heard his rants. I saw the insanity dancing in his eyes. By the way, as he drove this dagger into my chest. As he spoke, Savion advanced on the Azura, the ghostly dagger embedded in his vest. Crank shrank beneath Dougal rather than face the ghost's naked wrath. Point taken, he squeaked. Death has done nothing to improve his majesty's condition. Savion crossed his arms over his middle, resting just under the blade in his chest. In death, his madness grows. He speaks as if Ascalon city were not in ruin, as if the Char had been pushed back, and as if his son still lived. Dougal knew they needed to get moving fast. If Adalbert found them, Savion wouldn't be able to protect them. To the ghostly courier, he said, we came here for a great treasure mentioned on an ancient map. Do you know where such treasure would be? Ah, said Savion. And now the ghost allowed himself a grim smile. You got my note. Your note, said Dougal. During the first few years of my undeath, I thought I could gain my revenge on Adalbert. I created maps and notes describing the city and the treasures in the vault. I cast them loose on the wind and watched them carry beyond the battlement. My hopes were that someone would arrive and dispatch Adalbern's ghosts. There were those who came, driven by Erevi's promised gold, but the army of ghosts and the Mad King repelled them. Eventually, I ran out of ink and patience, and I abandoned the effort. Riona said quietly, Dax map. Dougal nodded. One of Savion's missives had ended up in the old archives, and from there fell into Dax's hands. But Dougal noted that, although Savion claimed disinterest in the matter, he still seemed very interested in some form of vengeance against the king. I doubt we can slay a dead king, he said, but we do seek one of his treasures. The weapon borne by the Char leader, an ungu set with gems. It's called the Claw of the Conqueror. Savio nodded. I know of such a weapon. His Majesty stripped it from the corpse of the Imperator who brought it here. For many years, His Majesty prowled through the city, salvaging armor, weapons, and anything of value. He sealed it in the vault of the royal treasury. So your ancient maps were correct, said Riona. Mostly, said Savion. Most of the entrances to the palace itself were shattered in the faux fire. Those that survived have collapsed as the ruined buildings have settled. If you want to get into the royal vault, you would have to descend down the pit where the heart of the faux fire lies. Dougal overlaid the image of the current ruins with what he had memorized from the map. Yes, if he lowered himself into that pit, he would be relatively close. Will you help us? Asked Dougal. I already have, said the ghost, and I think removing one of Adalbert's prizes will vex him greatly. If you can discomfort him in the process, I would be much obliged. While I cannot send the king's ghost to the mist, I could still take comfort in petty vengeance. Perhaps I can get him mad enough. He would have said more, but Riona interrupted. He's here, said Riona, who had moved back from the tower's entrance. She had dropped her voice to a whisper. What do you mean, he's here? Asked Ember, matching her tone. I mean, he's here, said Riona. Adalbert, on the parapet right above us. She pointed to the ceiling, and everyone looked up unless Dougal heard nothing. He usually remains on the north wall, or under the castle in the catacombs, said Savion. What would he be doing above us? How often do you get living visitors? Dougal asked. Almost never, Savion admitted. He must have heard his soldiers chasing us, said Dougal. He's up there looking for us. A great voice that chilled Dougal to his bones rang out through the city. Guard, bellowed King Adalbert. I have found our invaders. Come to me, and we shall mete out our justice for their crimes.